thank you for coming to tonight's talk at Bozar with two big writers, European writers, Slovenian writer Drago Jančar and Belgian writer Stefan Hertmans. Both authors of an immense oeuvre, authors of collections of essays, novels, short stories, poetry books, theater plays, translated in almost 30 languages, I think, each. Your best and long-selling novels and other books received many awards. But what makes this tonight's event so peculiar and so special, I think it's the story that lies behind this tonight's encounter. And the story goes like that. Drago Jančar was visiting Brussels several years ago for another reading, for one of his translations into Dutch, I think. And we met then, and we were talking about many things, about Belgium, about Slovenia, about literature, a bit the same what we will do tonight here together. And as we were talking about literature, I also mentioned back then I was working on a translation of a novel of Stefan Hertmans, and we were talking about it, and Drago was interested, like, okay, that sounds interesting, I would love to read it. And I sent him a copy afterwards. He read a copy, he loved it. A bit afterwards, Stefan Hertmans was reading your novels, Drago, in Dutch translation made by Roel Schuit. And now, several years later, we are sitting here together tonight, and we will dive together in your thoughts, your ideas, your writings, and let's see what happens. So first encounter was in books, second encounter is here on the stage, live, and we will share this very special moment with you all. Thank you for coming. So, Drago and Stefan, let's begin with that coincidence, with that encounter. Literature in translation, where does that bring authors who are making books?
To me anyway, translations have changed my way of looking at my own work. Being translated in another language is coming into another cultural world. There are other references. Irony is different. Humor is different. Understatement is different. The cultural references might be quite hermetic for another cultural sphere. So it has taught me what it is to be a Flemish author. And this is very remarkable. I only have a clear view on my own identity as a writer since I'm translated so much. Because otherwise you're like the goldfish in the bowl. You're in your evidence and you don't realize. And since my work is translated so much, I look differently at my own work. And that is very interesting because I happen to have excellent translators, of which one of the best, ladies and gentlemen, is here. My Slovene translator is Staša Pavlović. So this learns me a lot about how I write myself and what I want to do. It's very enriching.
And is that a matter of perspective or matter of broadened perspective by encounters, or just the idea of thinking of your books as an object that was made by you, but then is also made by other people, and at the same time still by you?
It's exactly, it's a sort of cooperation. When I make, for instance, the most difficult thing to translate is wordplay, because wordplay is idiomatic. You have one word in Dutch that makes me think of another word that rhymes, for instance. Or there is a proverb in my language, which I know since my childhood. How do you translate it? Because people in France or in Germany or in Slovenia don't have this same pun. So I can see the talent of the translator in the puns, in the wordplay, what he does with it, because it completely has to leave the original language and to find something else. And this is very interesting to see how it works. So now more and more when I write, I know, okay, now doing something that is not immediately translatable. And I remember the word of Harry Mulisch, who at a certain moment, arrogantly as he always was, said, I write books that you can translate without a problem. So then I thought, what is the censorship? He is acting on himself to be able to be a writer who says, I will give my translators no problem do you write a sort of language, this is clear like water? Or, because you can never do that. There are always things that you do not realize how typical they are for your language and for your identity. And then there is, at the same time, something on the reverse you have to do. Don't take too much into account, because otherwise you become paranoid in writing. You have to be free. And sometimes I write a paragraph and I think, this will be hard for my translators. So be it.
And how is that for you, Drago?
I never, on the opposite, I never think about the translator, which problem he will have or she will have, because I know that some even Slovenian names are difficult to pronounce, or some Slovenian problems are so particular that only we understand our legend, our myths, etc. And if I would start to think about this problem, it won't work for me, It would harm my writing. But translator is, for me, really an important person. Claudio Magris, an Italian author, he always says that translator is co-writer, actually. And I think that I was told that my Dutch translator, Roel Schuit, will come tonight, and maybe he is in the audience. He is my co-author in Flemish and Netherlands. He is a co-author because he must. It's well known, it's a cliche, I'm repeating now the well-known things, that he must the atmosphere of the original transform into the language where the reader will try to catch it. And not all things are translatable, I would say. Some things are even from your books, if you think of the translator, but I think in your Converta, or even more in Terpentin, some things are for Slovenian readers or for some other readers are very, very, very Flemish, I would say. You have even some Flemish quotations or parts of. So, but it gives to the text a flavor of original, and you can never. You know better, Sasha, how. You can never translate everything and the whole atmosphere and all problems, but you can give to the reader a flavor of original. And if you catch the atmosphere, you have everything, I believe. Not only words, I agree with you completely, yes.
I would like to go a bit back to what you said. I think that was your first sentence. Through translation, I realized I'm a Flemish author. And I would like to ask you, because we have tonight encounter between you two, but in a way we also then have an encounter between the two countries, and the two countries that we could say a country from the west and a country from the east, and then we Slovenes would repair you, no, not east, Middle Europa. But I wonder, like, you are part of kind of the same generation, age-wise, but is there geographical part that made your intellectual and artistic influences that shaped you on that level differently based on location where you're coming from? Does it mean that, Drago, you were looking to influences from other regions than Stefan was? I just want to hear from both of you, what were things that shaped you as authors? Maybe starting from early on or later, doesn't matter, but just to see, like, if Europe, for a writer from Europe, is one entity, or if that's also divided based on intellectual, artistic influences that are traveling different paths, I think. So I would be very curious to hear what you think about it.
There's a certain chronology in it. I started as a writer admiring the great Flemish writers and poets. One of the most impressive things to me was, when I was very young, to read the great poets from the interbellum in Holland. Vestek, Slauerhoff, Marsman. They were huge, Nijhoff. They were of huge influence to me. You forget that when you go on. And then, of course, Flemish poets like Van Osta and Gilliams. Then I studied English at university, and I read for the first time in the language Donne, Yeats. Eliot, Pound. And it opened such huge frustration to me, what this language could do that I felt I could not do. So I started reading the translations of Pound, Eliot, Yeats, etc., which were not exactly the same, but they touched my language. Then I learned to know the German expressionists, because I wrote song text at that time. I had hair longer than you and had a guitar, so I made song text in English, you know, horrible. Happily, they're all gone, they're all vanished, nobody will know. But I was influenced by Romantic English poetry. But somewhere it entered into me. And in the years that as a young intellectual, I refused this because I wanted to be severe, an intellectual poet. I didn't want to be confessional and sentimental, etc. I wanted to be a hard poet. That's good for a young poet to do that. But when I opened myself after 3 volumes of poetry and in my prose, there was something I had forgotten. All those things of my romantic years that gave me confidence to open my register and to find a language that was maybe in me, which had even to do with the rhythms of the music of my youth. And so this is very complex, how it works. And if I have to look at the evolution in my poetry, I see all those phases in which I ripened and became who I am now. And now I have the impression that there are so many registers I can open like a drawer and say, I take something out of that style because I need it now. Yeah. You can see it in my last novel, The Opgang. You know, it's bluntly polystylistic, all sort of styles in it. It's not le style c'est l'homme. It's just a writer who knows that there are very many styles you can use. And then, referring to your question of the European thing and the Mitteleuropa, the first shock for me was being in Vienna and seeing how Croatian bookstores, Serbian bookstores were in Vienna. And I realized that Vienna was not just Mitteleuropa, Vienna was completely different from being in Berlin. And then for the first time I felt a Western European. I realized I'm from the West. I would never have known. I thought I was universal, you know. That's how arrogant we Western Europeans are.
West is always universal,
yes.
Right? I mean,
and then you come there, you see a Russian bookstore, you see a Serbian bookstore, and you see how Vienna was. And then you begin to read the Habsburg era differently. And this goes also for reading afterwards also Joseph Roth differently and so on. So you open, and then my first visits after '89 into former communistic cities, of which some I have written about in my book Intercities, learned me that we really had lived for 50 years on different planets. And that at the same time we could recur to a certain great European spirit from 1914, but that since then we had lost contacts on certain psychologies. So then I read Croatian authors, I read Hungarian authors, George Conrad and so on, and Esther Raj.
But
so gradually you open up,
automatically
you
to
open up, and you maybe to become a European you need some time and some study.
Is that also your experience?
Are we talking about how to be European or what? No, interesting is that I've read the same authors of poetry as you did in a certain age. Ezra Pound and Eliot, that was discovery for me. I have never written a word of poetry, only prose. I was always, but it influenced me somehow how they manage the metaphors, the language, symbols, etc. And that was also discovered. So I was living on the other side of the world than you, let's say on the eastern side. Even Slovenia always consider itself as a Central European, not Eastern, not Balkan, etc.
Yeah.
But it was, of course, it was Eastern European. It was Yugoslavia at that time was living in Yugoslavia was better than in other Eastern countries. Can I repeat the joke that you said before, that Yugoslavia was Switzerland of Stalinism? Yes, we were talking before. Sorry if I betrayed you. That was funny for me, yes. And so it was more open, but it was dictatorship in political sense. We were very open in a cultural sense, in the literature, in the theater, in a film, black wave of Yugoslav film, Serbian wave. That was quite an open space, and we had the contacts, we had translations in Yugoslavian bookstores that you could find Kundera from the beginning. Solzhenitsyn was everywhere, Bunin was translated, etc., which was not allowed in other Eastern countries. So we were in touch, but we were the other world, actually. So with this great political joining, it still remains some, as you can see nowadays, that against this kind of a unpleasant split between West and East is coming out. I believe this is my theory, or my modest theory, that West don't understand East very well. You understood because you were in bookstores and you saw everything. But in common, because to live last 50 years in, I don't know, in Minsk or Minsk on the other side, say in Warsaw or in Gdansk or in Rotterdam or in Lyon, I don't know, that was different. That was different. That was not only different political experience, that was different deep human experience. Yeah, relations between the people were different and so on. And I believe that still nowadays part of these misunderstandings are coming from this different experience. We just joined the Europe as a political, it was a political solution, and of course East wanted to be West, and they still want, or we still want to be. It's like West conquered the East somehow, but they still didn't understand. And here comes literature. Here comes literature, because through the literature you can deeper and better understand individual human relations, living in the society, closed society, strange society somehow for Western readers. And through literature one can understand things better. Even I understood your country better when I wrote. When I was here on a residence in a small village, in a village of Volezele, in Flanders, and some time ago I was in Mont-Noir on French side.
I was there too. Yeah.
Of Flanders in a villa, Jursenar. And so, but accidentally, a day before I traveled to Flanders, I discovered in antiquariat in Ljubljana Felix Timenman Pelieter. And it was translated by some Slovenian left-wing. Later he was minister, Juško Zag was his name, later he was minister. And I learned later that Timerman had the troubles because a kind of collaboration with Germans, etc. Not very much, but some troubles, yes. So that was Europe in 30s. And they understood each other through the literature. Apparently two persons who were politically different, but through the description of a Flemish country in this book, Pelieter, etc., somebody in Slovenia could learn much more than even they were on the political different sides.
Yeah, I understand very well what you say, because my view on Slovenia, for instance, was very idyllic. I came into Slovenia for the first time via Istria, Trieste. It was a very idyllic country for me. And then I learned all the stories you describe in your novels. And then I saw what tensions there were, the difference between Maribor and Ljubljana.
So Drago's novels spoiled the idyll for you.
It taught me how complex the situation also has been. And then I went for the first time to the Festival of Ptuj, where Hungary is very close. So then I thought Slovenia is also very complex. If you're in the West, you're very close to Austria. You have some Habsburg traditions. If you go to Hungary, it's completely different. If you go to Maribor, there you're close to Austria. Then only you begin to understand, and I think you're correct that because in novels you can write how a country is from the inside and not from the outside, and that's very important. Without talking about empathy or literature is joining everybody, I mistrust all that cheap talk about what literature can do. Literature is not read by politicians, so don't
That's
make any
true.
illusions.
Luckily
they don't
not.
read it.
Luckily not.
But we read it, so we know that understanding the character of a language. I'm very much amazed, for instance, that you call Palita. It's in Dutch you call it Palita by Felix Timmermans. Yeah, and.
But in Slovenia,
it gives a very good image.
Flemish country, Flanders land or
no,
something.
there's no problem. But Timmermans indeed gives an image of the Flanders that is lost by industrialization. It's completely lost, this sort of feeling, this sort of being close to nature, this almost Christian naturalism has vanished completely. So he is a witness, and I think it's not interesting to be against or in favor of a writer. It's always interesting to see him as a witness of something. And then every writer is interesting. You should not be in accordance with a writer. You should not say, okay, this writer has my point of view. When I was writing a few weeks ago about the liberty of being vaccinated or not, some people on Messenger let me know that I was a fascist. So, and somebody wrote to me, I'm going to burn all your books. I thought you were a great writer and now I hate you.
Because
so I said,
you had
okay,
a
go
wrong
on,
opinion.
burn my books, because if you read books in order to find something to agree with you, you're not a reader to me.
You came for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, you read me for the wrong reasons. You read because you want to open up. You don't read because you want to be affirmated in what you know.
Confirmed, yes.
So.
But finally, it's not useful to burn the book, because one of my friends who was in Sarajevo, besieged city during the winter when it was cold, he burned his library to warm himself and his family. So in this matter, maybe it was useful to burn the book, but not in this
Another
case.
context.
This reduces fanaticism to luxury.
If we move our gaze now to your novels, and if I say your novels, then I mean especially, Stefan, your trilogy, and Drago, your To noć sam je video in Ljubezen tudi, so the books that you read respectively. I see, and I think you both saw it as well, that there is something that connects you, that there is something in those novels. You cannot call it that they are similar. Okay, what is similar is that they are both happening in the moments, in historical moments, not in the present, but in a moment that has already passed. And that you're both interested, besides this historical moment, actually in inner turbulences of your characters. Your characters are very alive. They're not there to serve history, but they are there, the history is there to serve them, actually, right? But there is one big difference in your approach, and I find this very interesting. Stefan's approach is, I'm, as an author, very present in my novels, in those 3 last novels. And Drago, your approach is, I'm not, I'm absent from it.
What?
I'm absent, I'm not... personally there, I'm not traveling in the book, I'm not present in the book. And I would like to hear how was that born. I would like to walk us through your process of how you get there, how you decided to do it like that or another way.
I am always defending all of my heroes. So Flaubert said, Madame Bovary, c'est moi, and I must be on the side of a criminal or collaborator or a hero or somebody else if I want to make alive and present also for the reader. And it's not easy. Many times it's not easy. you are suffering sometimes because your task is to somehow that you defend your hero in good or in bad, and then things can become a controversial, complex, etc. You know, the socialistic realism, it was easier. Finally, somebody was wrong. Even not all literature from that time is not bad. There are some very good novels, but mostly the result was such. And so I am involving myself a lot. Every sentence is actually part of your life and your experience, or your reading, not only the real experience. Borges says, I don't like Borges very much. He's not my writer. He's excellent. He's original. He's Columbus in writing, but he's not my writer. But he has an interesting sentence. He says, also from the books grows new books. New books are coming out, and it is true. Sometimes a sentence is in one book. Something good example is Converta, for instance. From one fragment, from one document, from one information, suddenly grow the whole story of that woman, of Converta, about her love with that Jew, about Europe of that time, about anti-Semitism. We are then in Jerusalem, and it's a beautiful invention that from such a fragment, everything can come out. So it was easier to talk about Stefan than about
in your case, that happened with a photograph, right?
Yes.
I mean, it was not a story, but it was like a photograph.
Yes, I have also some such cases. I had in one of that last two books I saw her that night. I had 2 pages in one chronicle, historical chronicle, that I researched a little, but mostly then I only on this event the whole novel. From this event, the whole novel raised in a story. Yes, it is. There is some similarities. We are different, but there are some similarities. Fortunately, we read each other. We realized because of Stasha, of course, because she translated and make us learn closer. So
I must say that when I read Tem Noc, what is it? That night I read about this fantastic moment when the military character, the soldier, seduces Veronica, who is an aristocratic woman. And then all of a sudden, she goes with him to the south of Serbia. And this is a fantastic thing in the novel, when they go to the south of Serbia, and she remains loyal, but at the same time you see there's a breach growing. They're going to. And then I read in your biography, you were there as a military.
Yes,
so I saw, okay, he's in his novel.
I was in
as
army
much as I do.
Yeah. I was in army. I was in, let's say, communist army, but my hero is a monarchist army. But army is always. In South Serbia, it's the same army. Yeah. There are same habits and same behavior and attitude, etc. Yes.
So, of course, I'm also reading you because it interests me very much how you work with historical material and how you make something objective, subjective again, because that's writing a novel. You make something so-called objective historical, you make it subjective again, you incorporate it again. And then I saw that very much of your own history is also in your books. So to return to your question, I am visible as the narrator in my books, but that doesn't mean that I'm more present than he is. And this is always very interesting, because at a certain moment there was a discussion in certain literary criticism that with all those documentary novels, the true historical fiction, the true literary fiction was dying. Because now we were some semi-journalists, etc. And then you return to Kafka. Everything Kafka has invented, you can find back in his biography. So it has always been there. Writers fantasize about things they have partly seen themselves, and then they give it to a character. And whether I'm present as a narrator or not, it's an interesting thing. I want to talk about it. It's an interesting technique. But it doesn't mean that I am more present than other writers. It just means that I come out and I say, I'm here. And I try to be the journalist of the story. But I saw how deeply rooted your novels and your fantasy is rooted in the history of Slovenia.
Thank you. I don't believe in historical novel, that it exists as historical novel. Every historical novel which is speaking about existential, individual questions of a moral, of ethics, of society, of everything, is contemporary novel. Marguerite Yourcenar, once I mentioned her before, I admire very, very much this author. And when she wrote Hadrian Memories, they asked her, why are you writing at all historical novels? And she said, it's unbelievable that they keep asking me this again and again. People can travel on the moon today or try to enter in the space, but they don't believe that you can enter with imagination in the past times. So you in your family chronicle and of World War I, and I can travel in World War II. I didn't saw it, but I've heard a lot, etc. And I even traveled in 17th century. I tried with one novel. So. But I'm writing the contemporary novel about our own experience, fears, about how to survive, about oppression, about defending yourself, about love, hatred, etc. Yes, and this is contemporary novel. It's not historical novel. Yes. It's a background, sometimes picturesque, something useful, sometimes. Okay, exists something like historical novel if there is some adventure of a court of Louis XIV in Versailles and some courtesans there, etc. It could be a historical novel. But if you speak about the essential question of a human being existence or relations, then it is contemporary.
I remember, because you talk about Yourcenar, there's a very nice anecdote. When she published Adrien, Les Mémoires d'Adrien, I think it was Bernard Malamud, wrote a destroying criticism of the book and said, there's nothing of the real Hadrianus in her book. And Marguerite Yourcenar answered, no, but it's my Hadrianus, not yours.
Exactly.
Which is the correct answer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you, Stefan, now to read a fragment from the Bekeerlinge, the convert, because I think it follows nicely what we were just talking about. Let's hear and read it in the translation there.
I will read it, a fragment in Dutch. It's a fragment where the main character of the book, the convert, the Bekeerlinge, le cœur converti, answers Clermont-Ferrand. And he sees the girl he is trying to understand who lived 1,000 years ago. And in his imagination, he sees her as a modern girl, just walking in the street at the end. Tegen de avond rijd ik de stad Clermont-Ferrand binnen. Het is nog broeierig warm. De koophallen en supermarkten zwermen uit. Het is moeilijk parkeren. Ik heb honger en ik ben moe. Ik duik een parkeergarage in. Wanneer ik boven kom uit de parkeergarage, doemt de zwarte, uit lavasteen gehouwen kathedraal van de heilige Maria ten hemelopneming voor mij op. Wat ik zie, is niet een van de Romaanse kerken die de vluchtelingen hebben gezien. En eer voor zij hier aankwamen, hadden de vikingvoorvaderen van Vigdis de heilige plaatsen nog vernield. Op het ogenblik dat Vigdis met David de stad bereikt, staat er op de plek van deze kathedraal reeds een derde opeenvolgende kerk. Dit keer in opdracht van bisschop Stefanus II gebouwd. De kathedraal die hier nu staat, dateert dan weer van 3 eeuwen later. Maar de 10e-eeuwse crypte van de oude kerk is nog intact. Hoewel ik er niet in mag. Het bezoekuur is beperkt tot 1 uur op woensdag. De oude God zal wel weten waarom. Er is te veel volk in de hoge ruimte. Ik stap weer naar buiten. Tussen de straatstenen zijn metalen beeltenissen van Vercingetorix en Paus Urbanus II aangebracht. Ik zoek de oude basiliek van de Notre-Dame-du-Port en vind haar op een klein ingesloten plein. Dat de kerk zeer oud is, blijkt al uit het feit dat je meer dan 10 treden af moet dalen. Ze ligt aanzienlijk lager dan het straatniveau. Wanneer je er binnentreedt, wacht je een sensatie. Het interieur is verrassend lichtgeel getint, helder en toch log van bouw. De avondzon doorstraalt de ruimte alsof ze nieuw en gewichtloos is. Het heeft iets Byzantijns. De constructie dateert uit de 6e eeuw, maar de kerk werd in de 11e eeuw herbouwd, nadat ze door de Normandiërs in brand werd gestoken. Het moet voor Vigdis een betekenisvolle, aangrijpende plek zijn geweest, die al haar tegenstrijdige gevoelens opnieuw aanwakkerde. De kerk is zo bijzonder dat ze in 1998 door de UNESCO tot werelderfgoed werd uitgeroepen. Ik sta er verbluft te kijken naar de korte, plompe zuiltjes boven in de centrale koepel. Het contrast tussen de massieve pilaren en de allegorische reliefscènes in grijze steen die ze bekronen. Laag hangen sobere kandelaars in 6-bladige vorm die bijna aan een synagoge doen denken. De oude brandglasramen zijn intact en filteren het licht op een mystieke, stille manier. Ergens tegen de muur steekt een zo massief, donker, oud wijwaterbekken uit de muur, dat ik opnieuw hoop iets aan te raken dat ook Vigdis heeft aangeraakt. Het gevoel op een belangwekkend kruispunt te staan overvalt me pas goed wanneer ik afdaal naar de crypte. Hier is de jonge vluchtelingen voor het laatst komen bidden en vergiffenis komen vragen voor haar bekering. Ze wist dat haar Joodse doopsel niet veraf meer was en dat er geen terugkeer mogelijk was. David wacht buiten. Er zijn genoeg Joodse kennissen in de stad die hij bij zijn heenreis heeft leren kennen. Hij weet dat Vigdis hier iets voor zichzelf op te lossen heeft. Want hier moet Hamutal stilaan afscheid nemen van Vigdis Adelais. Maar wat zij onmogelijk kan weten, is dat ze in deze crypte precies op de plek zit waar Paus Urbanus II jaren later zal komen bidden. De dag voordat hij in de velden buiten Clermont, daar waar nu de supermarkten en de tankstations heersen, zijn historische oproep tot de eerste kruistocht zal doen. Daarmee zal hij ook haar leven in het verre dorp in de Vaucluse voorgoed verwoesten. Na de yeshiva in Rouen is deze crypte met haar meer dan 1000 jaar oude zuilen de tweede plek waar ik zo dicht nader tot iets wat ook zij heeft gezien en aangeraakt. Het ene gebouw Joods en het ander christelijk, maar uit dezelfde onverzettelijke tijd, in dezelfde geest, lang voor die hoge, imposante gotische kerken. Deze sombere, primitieve intimiteit, die op een vreemde manier troost en beschermt tegen doodslag, fanatisme, oproer, armoede en ellende daarbuiten, tegen alle goorheid van het leven die ook haar heeft geschonden, tegen stank en rottenis, tegen dat hele heftige, vluchtige en onweerstaanbare leven dat haar op deze plek heeft gebracht. Hier valt het stil. Hier reikt de steen van de basiliek de hand aan de steen van de yeshiva van Rouen. En het doet haar beseffen hoezeer ze door liefde wordt gedreven, door passie voor die man die buiten ergens op haar wacht. Ze vergeet de tijd, ze verzinkt in gedachten, ze voelt hoe alles geleidelijk tot rust komt. Een uur later komt ze weer boven, in het licht van de avondzon. Ze loopt enkele meters voor mij uit. Ze draagt een zwarte legging, een lichtblauw shirt en witte sneakers. Ze ziet de menigte. Ze ruikt de bedwelming van het heden. Ze gaat een hoog, donker huis binnen. Ze reikt haar man de hand en ze vat moed. Ze hebben nog enkele weken te gaan tot Narbonne. De schemer is kort en warm.
Dank je, Stefan. This physicality, tangible presence of history, touching the same stone, walking on the same path, looking through the same window, seems very important to you in creating.
Well, in doing this research, I was reminded of the fact that there are only two things that can approach you to a historical character of 1,000 years ago: writings and stone. Let's think about 500 years further. Maybe it will not be chips, but writings and stone. We don't know. I mean, people wrote on parchment. That's also different than paper. But this is why I grew so obsessed by touching stones, because these were the only things, also in my village in Provence, there are ruins up in the rocks, of which I think they are, for instance, the ruins of the synagogue. And this is the only thing you can touch. Because the psychology you have to find for yourself. There is, concerning historical imagination, there was a certain moment when, in the Netflix series The Crown, when there were the parts about Diana and Charles, for instance, then it became very, a bit difficult in public opinion and so on, whether this was true or not. And then they interviewed the guys who were making the series of The Crown. And they said, is this all true? And they gave a fantastic answer. They said, we have the historical facts right, but we imagine all the scenes. So this is what I do in my novels. I try to have the historical facts right, but you imagine the scenes. If you write about this fantastic portrait you made of this Veronica woman, and how, because she was cultivated, they thought she was collaborating, only because she liked German music, etc., and German literature, and how the partisans then become very cruel also. You invent your scenes, but then at the end of the novel you say, you can still visit the castle. This is historical material.
Yes.
But you have the stones, and you have the witnesses, but you invent the scenes.
Like you said in another interview, that writing a novel is making up the truth, right?
It's making up the truth, yeah. It's fantasizing the truth, I hope.
Stones will bear witness.
One version of the truth, yeah.
Drago, I was reading an essay you wrote recently, I think during one of the last lockdowns, so in the last year and a half. It was actually an essay about Yugoslavia nowadays. But what I found interesting is, and at one moment you mention, or you write, that we are now living in a moment of already a dystopian world, because all the 20th century utopias are dead. And you said like social utopia, religious utopia, national utopias. And it made me think, and I would like to discuss it with you here, because I wonder, is that true? Are all utopias really dead? Are we really that far? And if so, is there something that came in their place, or did we reinvent them? So you say we are living in a dystopia because all the utopias are dead.
Of course, I don't know. In my last novel, everything is invented and everything is true. It's not on, as in that another case, it's not on a document. It was on. It started from one photography, and the whole story. Actually, I was living in Maribor, and it was on the Austrian border. There was a strong German minority before the war, and during the occupation, this minority took over, and many of them went to Gestapo, etc., and others in partisans, etc. I was listening these stories all the time, all my youth, concentration camps, partisans, occupation, etc. But it was somewhere I didn't like to listen all the time, but I knew that someday it will come that I will write, I'll say something about it. And when I saw this photography, somebody sent me a postcard from Maribor from the year. I didn't exactly know from which year, but I saw two girls. They were talking on the corner of one street, and then I realized that just on the edge of the photography there is a German soldier apparently in SS uniform. And I saw it's a war. It's a war. It's a city in a war. They're talking. They're chatting. These girls, but there is an SS officer. So and suddenly everything what I've heard, what I listening all the time, and about this city, about the country, about Slovenia, what I knew from books, everything started from this moment when I saw photography, and this is the first page of the novel. And so sometimes we run in this kind of utopia. In this book, everything is actually, some events are real from partisans, partly real. Everything is invented, but one critic, she said it's more real than reality. It's invented, but it's reality. I'm not sure if I answer on your questions.
Would you still like to add something?
Provisionally.
Well, he's talking about something that fascinates me enormously. It's the novel in Dutch is called En ook de liefde.
Yes.
What's the title in Slovene?
In ljubezn tudi.
Okay, in this novel, you start from this photograph.
Yes.
And you see that girl on the street.
Yes.
And she looks back.
Yes, exactly.
But in my edition, you don't see the SS, the Nazi. He's out of the frame. And I thought for myself, of course, you made the scene up, but I imagine the Nazi is on the original picture.
Yeah.
But then, have you ever found out who the girl really was, her real identity?
No.
That's very interesting.
No,
so you gave her an identity.
I was even afraid that they are still alive and somebody...
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
But that was very
I was
interesting.
thinking a lot of this, and then I said, I must do it, and
But now you come to
nothing happened.
something that I think is very interesting. And maybe this is utopian, because we're not talking about political utopias. You gave this girl a second life. When I look at this photograph after finishing the novel, there's all of this life of this girl.
You saw the photograph, because it was not on the Dutch cover, it was inside.
It's inside,
It's inside,
as a frontispiece.
yes.
It's inside.
Yeah.
So you return to it, and this is to me very interesting, that you can give a historical person who has no name, like the girl in my book, The Convert. You give her a name and you give her a life. And that's very interesting.
This is what Jursenar said, that with our imagination, we cannot only travel in past. I can make, she said, as you said, her own Hadrian.
Yeah.
And he is very alive now. More alive with his letters, which are well known, and his diaries, etc.
Maybe that's a literary utopia.
No, that sounds good. Sounds interesting. Yeah. We talked about history. We talked about geographic and mental differences. We talked about similarities, about novels you're writing. I would like to end up on a positive, optimistic note. We missed that, I think. I see you both as writers who can and do it. Also write about love with big pleasure and big pen, I will say. Brotherly love, platonic love, erotic love, everything. And I'm gonna give you a very cheesy question to end up. Why why we do still need to write about love?
Because I'm breathing, because I'm alive. That's why you write about love. But I must say that I attach a lot of importance to the psychology of writers when they write about love. In Galliot, you have a scene where Dorothea does not want to sleep with the emperor. That's fantastic. Yes. This is an emancipated woman in that time. She says, I will not sleep with him because that's stinking corpse. And I've read this stinking corpse. This is fantastic. This stinking corpse in the bed makes that Dorothea says, I will not have sex with him. And he's the emperor, he doesn't understand. But then, of course, I as a reader, I begin to interpret that stinking corpse of this small body and I say, this stinking corpse is his sexuality. That's his soul that's next to him. And she says, I will not sleep with his soul. And when I see a writer doing this, or what you do with Veronica, and that night I saw her face, to me it's one of the great things of artisanship as a male writer, what we are, to write in a believable way about women. You already quoted Madame Bovary. And I think every writer, male writer, should at one time cross the bridge and write about a woman from the inside, to know what it is. I lately said in an interview, since I wrote The Convert, I am more aware when I go in a parking lot at midnight and there's only 2 cars, that this is not a nice situation for a woman. Because we men, normally we don't realize that there for a woman there's danger. And if you start looking at the world from the point of view of your female characters, you behave differently.
They made you understand things.
And writing about love is one of the most difficult things, because you need a certain being reserved, and at the other hand, it's about giving over to a feeling. So I always say, writing about love requires the most technical skill, which is a very cold thing to say, but that's how it is.
So, Stefan, I'm very grateful that you started with this topic.
You see, I'm like a snake. I'm trying to get out of this.
Now I have some possibility to escape a little. It's such a misused word, such a cliche word, but on the other hand, the most important word from the ancient time, from the Holy Bible, and from ancient texts that we know. And so in these 2 extremes, I have troubles to use the word love. I don't know if I've said to some women, I love you. I tried to use another beautiful words, let's say. Yes. But, and then finally I have this word on the title of my book. So I couldn't avoid this title because that Byron rhyme that I loved when I was young, and when I knew what is love, when love is trembling of your soul and everything, when you are 18 or 17. And I loved in that time Byron's famous poem, and we are no more walking. What is that? What is the title? We are no more roving. And I remember this title. I said, "This is the problem of my book. Inside is a war which harmed the because I said in some war love conquer all, but war conquer love too." Yes, and I remember that title, and I put it on the front page. Even maybe Byron too wrote to his lover, man, but I don't know exactly. He was bisexual, yes. But anyhow, love is love. And so it's not easy, as Stefan said, because you can very easily be in a kind of a cliche, in a kind of a simplification of everything, because it's so in pop culture, everywhere, is in a religion, one of the most important questions, etc. So I think that then if you succeed to put it in the life, and that it will be that the reader will believe you, that it is, as you said, thank you so much, that these girls became alive, then you succeed somehow, I hope. But it's also with your story, how did this woman who was later converted to the Jewish, very unusual conversion, how they cannot do nothing else than go together, whatever happened. That boy, the family is against, she is a half criminal in this situation, etc., etc. And this is a beautiful solution too.
I must say that the most difficult problem was, what about the sexuality of this couple in the 11th century, fleeing? I had to think sexuality historical. And think for myself, they will not make love from the first night. They're not from our time. They're not like that. It will take maybe weeks before they do this. So writing about this being reserved for a Christian girl in the 11th century and a boy who's Jewish, and they're both from aristocratic families, I thought I have to do this very carefully and maybe not talk about it at all. So in one of my versions, there was no sex from Rouen to Narbonne. Then I thought, don't be ridiculous.
You changed your mind.
You have to write about it. So then all of a sudden in my novel, I let them make love for the first time on a Proust place. It's for the, we writers, we like literary jokes.
Wink, wink.
Don't mind. So they make love for the first time at somewhere near a wood. And then I thought, I can write about this heat in these two people suddenly. It has to be naive and very hot. Because naive sex is the hottest. They don't know what is happening to them. And all of a sudden it happens. And then I thought, if I want to make one mistake, you put the woman on top. That's forbidden. Not in the Middle Ages for this Christian girl. Don't do that. Let them have sex in a way that they don't know what is happening to them. So this is also, writing about sex is also thinking, in which frame does it suit? If it's in 1940, it's different from now. If it's in the 11th century, it's different from 1940. And you need, as a writer, to always look for the most minute detail. You have to always look at the bigger picture. And that's when you find the good details.
Sounds like a very interesting historical research.
It was very interesting to write it. Absolutely. That was a good day in my life.
Drago Jančar, Stefan Hertmans, thank you very much. You're welcome to buy books outside in many languages, I think. They will be sold, and the authors will be available to sign them for you if you want. So thank you very much for coming.